I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the NAFI 10 Question Challenge, the online video series where I find successful flight instructors, ask them 10 questions, and find out how they've leveraged their time as flight instructors for personal and professional success. Today, my guest is Todd Shellnutt. Now, Todd is the Flight Standards Manager for ATP Flight School. He is a CFII, MAI, and ATP. He earned his CFI initial in 2003, which is about 18 years of CFI experience. He earned the NATA Award for Excellence in Pilot Training in 2019. And he also earned the AOPA Flight Training Excellence Award for Best Flight Instructor in 2015. Todd, welcome.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you were able to make it. And without further ado, we'll just jump right into the very first question. Was flight instruction part of your original career plan, or was it something you never anticipated doing?
It was something that I had not anticipated doing. So the whole flight instructor thing for me was a push due to 9/11 events. And I had a job that was lined up as soon as I graduated with my commercial. And I was not able to get into that position due to some of the restrictions and due to some of the downfalls of aviation during that time. So I ended up having to take up flight instructing.
And, you know, sometimes it's serendipitous because you're still here. So it must have been a pretty good choice.
I think it was. You know, it's probably one of the most overlooked and I think probably, one of the most there's not a lot of people that look at flight instruction like, man, that's a pretty distinguished career. You're a flight instructor. It's only the ones that's outside of flight instructing, that's outside of aviation. They hear you're an instructor and they're like, oh, you're an instructor. Well, your knowledge level must be well above everybody else's. They don't really understand. It's the guys that's fresh out of college, they're fresh out of the school that actually do most of the instruction in our industry. So when I found out that as an adult learner, when I got into aviation, that there was a high demand for a well-versed, patient flight instructor, that was where I began to excel. So, which I think is a high virtue, as being a patient flight instructor. So that's where I started to excel, and I never got in a rush with things, and it paid off.
Yeah, sounds like it. Reflecting on your instructor skill with your first student, how well do you think you did?
Oh, it was absolutely terrible. It was, I soloed her well before her time. I was an international student. She was from England. And my flight school that I was working at, it was like a competition to see who could solo people the quickest, when you could always have bragging rights with, well, I soloed my student in 11 hours. Well, I soloed my student in 9.3. I did mine in 9.1. And so I guess there was a portion of that for me in which I was trying to push to be part of the group and be part of the clan. And I pushed her way too hard. And I'm not sure. I never really followed her track afterwards, but hopefully she finished. But I know I wasn't the best fit for her as a brand new instructor, because I was just trying to go too fast and just trying to get from one point to another. And I really didn't, I don't think I really cared back then about that aesthetic bond. Had the cognitive and the psychomotor, but that aesthetic bond was not there. And that's what I think really kind of made my downfall at first as an instructor. But yeah, it was a complete disaster, but it went up going forward.
Now, as a side question, do you think that is a common problem? Do you think that, in the industry, we do tend to solo students too early because of sort of personal motivations?
Absolutely. And, the problem, I use that word very liberally. I'm not saying it's a problem, but it is to me, in my eyes, it is a problem. There's just not a lot of checks and balances for flight instructors out there. There's not anybody that's kind of overseeing you when you're out in the field going, don't do that. That's not, oh, don't do that. That's not good. We don't have, because it's just me and the other person, and we're in the airplane. And, unless you have somebody riding back seat that's got more experience than you, and it's just very hard to find somebody like that. So you just don't know what you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we all are trying to get to the same place, but all of us are doing it just a little bit differently. And because of that, it makes a big impact on how a flight instructor is going to get from one point to another. So if there's not a regimented cycle there of checks and balances, and if the flight instructor hasn't invested themselves into those check and balances, it could end up bad.
Yeah, I agree. Most of us have had an instructor mentor who sort of helped us learn the ropes. Who was yours, and what was the most meaningful thing they taught you?
So mine was actually my first examiner. He's now passed away, but his name was Jeff Helm. He was out of the Atlanta Fisdo area, and I was trained out of Macon, Georgia, at a little small flight school called Southeastern School of Aeronautics, which is now defunct. And Jeff's whole demeanor at that time was, of course, probably like a lot of majority of pilots out there in the industry, in which they would simply just treat everything as, hey, it's just, don't worry about that. That's just the way it is. And of course, from a young instructor and a young pilot, I'm like, oh man, that is so cool. Look at that. Look at that. Look how that airplane flies. Look at that cool airplane. He's like, I got 1,000 hours in that thing. Or, it was just routine. And so he would kind of bring me down to earth a lot of times, where he was like, eventually, and I didn't really understand at first what he was trying to do, but he would use sayings like, eventually the cool's going to wear off, and then where are you going to go from there? And I didn't really understand what he said at first. And then after a year or so, I got to know him a little bit better. And I said, what do you mean when you keep saying this? And he says, Todd, if you can't find a way to make this job interesting and rewarding, then the coolness is eventually going to wear off. Mm. And he says, what are your plans on making this career of yours? What are you going to do to make aviation cool? What are you going to do to make it rewarding? How is it going to pay you back for all the time and money that you've invested in it? And if you're just sitting there in the right-hand seat logging hours, or sitting in the left-hand seat pushing buttons on autopilot, where's the reward in that? What's going to go on? And he said, sometimes it's not all about the money. And I'm going to tell you, that's 100% true. It is not all about the money.
Yeah, no, in everyone's career, I think that's an eventual lesson you do have to learn. And I can understand that advice, because if you don't learn that until 10, 15 years in, when you're already life invested, what do you have left?
That's right. And it'd be very difficult for you to go back and try to correct a lot of those errors if you wait till 15 years, because the law of primacy not only works for students, but it also works for the people who are actually teaching. So if you get something set in your ways, it's very difficult for you to change that, because that may be the only thing you've ever known, or the only way you've ever known.
Absolutely. So, yeah. Absolutely. What's the most valuable non-aviation skill you've learned from your time as a flight instructor?
The most valuable non-aviation skill. Oh, well, that's kind of a loaded question to me, John. And the reason why I say that is because I use probably every one of my life skills in aviation. But, one of the things that they don't really teach you and train you a lot on in CFI training and piloting is that relationship with your student. I mean, they have a little bit of information in the FOI book, but there's a little piece of information. It's right in the front of the little paragraph. It's right in front of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. And it says this, and I'll paraphrase, I don't want to say exact, but it says, the information in this book is only meant to give you a very rough once over, and you should probably seek out other things to help you out. So it really wasn't until I did an aviation bachelor's degree, and then I did a business master's degree. And it wasn't really until I started getting into some psychology courses outside of that on a business standpoint that I actually really kind of understood what it meant to be a flight instructor. And that's just having those good psychology and people skills, and we just don't get taught a lot of that. We get taught how to do a Shondell, which is, don't get me started on that. There's a lot of things that we get taught and that we have to do in aviation, and it's just it doesn't really have a true meaning for what the person is going to go to eventually. So, non-aviation skill, aviation skill, not instructor skill, but it's going to have to be the study of psychology and how to work more closely with people, because in aviation in general, and again, not dealing with the flight instructor world, but in aviation in general, if you're very well versed in psychology, you can pretty much solve all problems and look at all problems. It's ADM and risk management. All that stuff comes from your ability to be able to gauge and work problems out. And we just don't spend a lot of time studying that as private and instrument and commercial. And so if the flight instructor is not well versed in that and how to relate that meaning, it really doesn't go well. But it just doesn't go into enough detail in the books that we currently have in our industry to make it truly worthwhile for the instructor.
Yeah, I can totally see that, because being able to read people, being able to understand if your student is, tired, frightened, angry, stressed out, all of those things can affect their ability to not just absorb the information that you're trying to tell them, but their ability to perform whatever tasks you're asking them to do. And even more importantly than that, sometimes it might affect their ability to do it safely. So being able to analyze those things before they go solo or take a check ride is a huge thing.
Yep.
So what do you enjoy most about flight instruction?
Well, I am very big on ensuring that I'm doing the best job I can. So I try to ensure that when I'm working with someone, that I try to let them know that they're doing a good job. And I try to also let them know if they're doing a bad job. But it's all in the way we present it and all the way we say it, because if you say it the wrong way, even sometimes good things can come out badly. So for me, I'd like to be able to have that understanding from my student to say, I need constant feedback. If you don't tell me what I'm doing wrong, if you don't tell me what you're not getting, if you don't tell me what you're not understanding, I can't progress. And I'm not trying to just progress just with you. I'm trying to progress in the industry to know more and be smarter and work with people. No two students learn alike. No two students have the same emotional set. So me trying to work with the students and get a feedback from them is very rewarding for me. And that goes in the case of, when someone solos and they put the social media post out there, they're like, thank you to my instructor, Todd Shellnutt, which has been a while since I soloed anyone. I'm more or less in the flight instructor game. But when I see that through social media as well, thank you very much for Todd helping me out with my flight instructor training. I surely appreciate it. That's, for me, that really does make everything worthwhile, because if you don't feel appreciated, it's just it's not going to be giving. The aviation is, man, as well as I know, this is not a very forgiving industry. If you make a mistake, you could lose everything at the drop of a hat. This is the epitome of integrity in our community. So you have to be that consummate professional, and you have to just be looking at every single thing that you can possibly do to improve. But how do you know that you're improving if you don't get that feedback? So for me, it's 100%. The reason why I do what I do is to keep growing professionally. And I can't do that until I actually get that 5-star rating from every single student. And I work with a student, I give them a Google form that I created. I'm not trying to plug Google forms here by any means, but it's just like, how did I do? Where would you expect me to do differently? Did I keep you informed? Did I arrive early? Did I know what type of soda that you like to drink so I can treat you to a soda? Just getting to know the client. And then in the end, that reward for me is them soloing safely, them passing the check ride on the first go successfully. And then also sharing the good news and praising. I like to be praised. Don't students like to be praised? They do like to be praised. We talk about that in the voice. But man, nobody wants to talk about the instructor being praised. There should be a handbook for the students that tell them how to praise their instructor. And that's what I go for is I thrive off that praise or somebody just saying, hey, you did a good job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I really like one of the things that you just said, or one of the words that you just said. So often we focus on the fact that flight training is between a instructor and a student or learner, if you want to call it that now. But you use the word client. I think so often we forget that they're customers, they're clients, and it's part of our job to make sure that our customer service and the customer experience is a notch above the rest. I mean, that's what also makes a successful and unique instructor, right?
Well, I'm going to tell you, John, pretty much anybody who's ever came through aviation, they spent a lot of money. And at some flight schools, man, they pay upwards to $100,000, to go zero to hero. For me, that's beyond student. That's client. That's, hey, I have a responsibility to you. I'm not just out here as you're my student. I have a responsibility to you. And for me, when I use the word student, it just doesn't echo enough responsibility. And so if I have a responsibility to my client, it just seems like a lot for me. It just sounds better. Say that to a student. There's not a lot of students that if you say you're my client, that they'll go, I would prefer that you don't call me that.
Right.
They like to hear that. And they like to know, hey, you know what? I'm being taken care of. I'm his client. I'm working with him. You're paying. Isn't that normally how we work? If you pay anybody else in the industry, don't they call you a client? You're paying me to do a job. Let me take care of you. And so you're my client.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, because when you equate it to other service industries, renting a private jet. Okay. So that might cost you $10,000 to go from point A to point B. Hiring a limo and going for a wedding, that might cost you a few $100, and you get the all-star treatment when that happens. When you're getting your private pilot license, it's going to cost you $10,000, and a instructor doesn't treat you like your important client. It goes to serve the wrong message.
I agree.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up, because you and I have known each other for a while, and something you told me at one point about things that you enjoy and makes you sort of a unique instructor is how much you love the regs. Talk to me about that.
Man, you're getting me all giggity right now. It's I don't care. I don't really care how much of a dork people think I am for saying that I embrace the regs. But if you really think about it, almost every single time the FAs had to talk to someone about something, it's got to do with the regs. You don't violate based off just human nature and faith. They're going to violate you based off regulatory guidance. And why not know your trade? God, I keep echoing those three words every single time I try to tell somebody something, and I'm trying to reinforce the decision to know this. And I'm like, man, how much money did you spend to be in this zero to hero program? Or how much money have you spent to do your private instrument? Know your trade, know what's going on. You should know every aspect about it. You should know everything about this plane. You should know everything about weather. You should know everything about airspace, and you should know everything you could possibly know about regs, because like I said, no matter what you look at, if someone has ever got in trouble with the FAA, it's because they violated something in the CFRs. And so I don't want to get violated. I don't want to get a LOI from the local FSDO. I want to try to do the best I possibly can. So whenever someone doesn't understand anything and I try to say, well, it's in the regs, and they pick it up and it's like this big, huge, thick book, and it's intimidating. And I'm like, well, you do realize that whole entire book is not regs. It's only half that thick book that you have in your hand. And if you split that in half, that's half regs and half AIM. And then if you just go in there and pull out part 61, you're only talking about 80 pages. One of the things that people ask me, they're like, how do you know this stuff so well? And I'm like, you know that it really hasn't changed since the day I walked in the door of aviation. I mean, it has, but we're only talking about just a couple of sentences and maybe some additions. Um, they added recreational pilot. That's only 6 regs, 5 or 6 numbers. I mean, it's not that complicated. And if you let's take one example, if you look at part 61.107, it's a very long reg. That's everything you got to know to be a private pilot in the airplane, and of course a little bit on the ground. But only one paragraph that applies to you, because that's only it's only airplane. So 61.107 is a couple pages long, but only one paragraph, because you're not flying helicopters or gliders or rotorcraft or lighter than air. So only one paragraph. So I actually went in and doctored it and downloaded the whole entire thing in a PDF format and chopped everything out. And it doesn't apply to me as an airplane pilot. 19 pages.
Huh.
And that's
a really interesting
we're
technique.
talking
I've
about.
never heard anybody do that.
We're talking about front and back on a piece of paper, just 19 pieces of paper. And that's from 61.1 all the way to the end of the CFI regs. Wow. So I didn't do ATP or ground instructor or sport, but 19 pages. And that's if you cut everything out that doesn't apply to airplanes.
Huh.
19 pages. We're not talking about a lot of stuff. So if you go in and actually start looking at it and trying to become more familiar with it, you realize that it's really not a lot, and it never changes. Well, I can't say that. It rarely changes. And when it does, it only tweaks it slightly. It's not that big of a deal. But I love the regs. I embrace the regs simply because when you are in a conversation with someone and you hear them talking and you're like, hey, well, just to let you know, the regs say this. And they'll go, wow, I did not know that. And you get them excited about knowing it. And you get others excited about knowing it. And they're like, man, I really probably would have made a big mistake if I would not have understood that. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's why you got to know the laws to drive a car on the road. And you got to know the laws to operate an aircraft. And if you want to, as a flight instructor, you have to know the certification of airmen and instructors, which is part 61. But you've also got to know part 91, which is everything you can't do. Or the way I like to say it, part 61 is all the way you can get your pilot certificate, and part 91 is all the way the FAA can take it away from you. So for me, the regs is just like a everyday form of life. And I love being getting phone calls and emails from someone saying, hey, can you interpret this? Or how do you interpret this? Or what do you think about that? I do like being that go-to person because for me, it's kind of like Mozart for me. Regs just come natural for me. So just like it would for any of those artists. I think I'm an artist when it comes to interpreting those. And I that's just one of those things I geek out on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what's your most interesting, scary, or fun story you've had as an instructor?
Interesting or fun story? Well, I have fun stories and I have interesting stories. I think a lot of the times I try to tell people the problems that I've actually experienced as a pilot. We hear about the truth and good things all the time, and we talk about safety and risk management and aeronautical decision making. But a lot of times I think a lot of pilots look at those aspects and they're just saying to themselves, yeah, I'll handle that when it happens, or why should I study that? It's all the same thing. And you got your 3 Ps and your 5 Ps and your decide. And they really don't understand what it truly means to embrace those things and make those good decisions prior. And so every single thing that's ever happened to me, which is a kind of a negative thing in my flying career, it's always been because I didn't understand something fully, or I didn't measure the risk correctly. And probably one of the most outstanding examples is when I first truly learned and understood multi-engine aerodynamics. I was a multi-engine flight instructor and I was working at my flight school, and I went out flying with my flight instructor, and we were out in a Piper Aztec, and we were having a little competition. And the competition was, hey, let's see who can hold the tightest tolerances on slow flight. And I was like, all right, come on, we'll do this. We'll have a little competition together. And I would do it, and then she would do it, and I would do it, and she would do it. And I was beating her just a little bit, like a knot or two, and we're slow flying, got the gear down, got the flaps in. We're in this Piper Aztec. And at the very crest of this slow flight, with the back in the days where we flew around with a stall warning horn blaring. Remember those days?
I do.
At minimum controllable airspeed. So I'm at minimum controllable airspeed, and I looked over and I said, once the student, now the teacher. And man, she reached up there and she grabbed one of those mixtures, and she left mixture, and she pulled it down. And the airplane went right into a VMC roll. Now, whether that was a smart maneuver or not on her part, let's just kind of focus on me for right now. So the first thing that I did was, because I wasn't an experienced pilot and I'd always been trained to the maneuver and not to real life, when the airplane started to roll, I rolled the ailerons back in the opposite direction, and I pulled far aft on the yoke as I could get it, because I'm going down and I'm going to the left. So I'm going to do the opposite, so I won't continue to do these things. And then I soon realized, as the airplane was upside down, that that wasn't the most appropriate decision to make. And then as we're upside down, she goes, move, slaps my hands off the flight controls, and she adds the power back in, and she rolls the airplane out just right on the heading we were on before we started. And she goes, don't ever say that to me until you have more experience. And that really kind of set in motion for me with know your trade. Because I could sit down and give ground school. I could tell you everything you want to know about multi-engineer dynamics, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it because there wasn't that need for me to get out there and put myself in a situation in which I absolutely, like, to get out of that, I had to have understood how this stuff actually works. And I'm like, man, what else? Yeah, what else do I not know? And so I had to play it by ear. And I'm like, wow, you know what? I probably need to understand stalls. I probably need to understand spins. Because I think I was like most instructors when they first start off, you know, when you get to do stalls. I say most instructors, there's probably some listening to this, like, I didn't have a problem. I did spins on day one on my discovery flight, and I loved it. I didn't. I hated it. I hated being in that unusual attitude, hated being in the stalls. And I shorted my customers for years, you know, when it come to stalls, because I was terrified of the airplane. I say years, it was probably 2 years, you know, and we do power on stalls. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's good enough. They probably won't even ask you to do that on the check ride. You're good, you know, because I was so petrified that something would happen. I didn't understand it. I went out to PDK in Atlanta and went around, did some upset training there for a few days. And it broke me of that, because I finally understood what was going on, but it was beyond the book. So I was only had the cognitive. I really didn't have the psychomotor version of what I should know. So
beyond the book. That's a really good way to put it. So in your mind, what makes for an exceptional flight instructor?
You know, I'm probably going to ruffle some feathers here, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. You know, if you look at the industry that we're in, it's really just, if you think about it and you really sit down, you look at what we're doing in the flight training industry. This is very controversial, what I'm about to say, but it's my point of view, and you don't have to agree with it. But we're teaching students everything they shouldn't do in a plane. We're telling them, we're not only teaching and telling them, when we're assessing and grading on them to actually go out there and do something that hopefully they would never go out and do in a plane. Let's purposely put this airplane in an accelerated stall. Let's purposely spin this plane. Let's purposely go slow flight. I don't know how well it would go over with an airlines pilot if they have one of the airline pilots come in and he just like, yeah, well, I had all these passengers on board, and I just thought I'd practice slow flight out here with the stall warning horn blaring off. We teach people to do things that they're not supposed to do in a plane, and they get graded on it. It's actually quite absurd when you think about it. We should be teaching them all the things that they should do and the practicalities of things. So I like to get down to that particular point in which I'm saying, first off, this is what this maneuver is designed to show you. And here's what would happen if we didn't know how to do this. And so, but we have to do this because the The FAA wants to see these things.
Mm-hmm.
But just understand, I don't want you going around doing this, but you have to do it to get certified. And if you look at all the things we have to do to get certified, and you think about it, and you look at the practical application of it, it's not probably the best thing to ask someone to do, because we don't do it in any other form of transportation. We don't actually say, hey, let's take this all the way to the limit. Let's take it all the way to the edge of the envelope and fly it all the way there to the edge of the envelope. But if you go past that edge of the envelope, you failed. Notice disapproval. You didn't pass the eval. It's really kind of absurd if you think about it. So for me, if I don't get right on top of that and say, now, this is not something you're going to go out there and do every day, but I've got to show you this thing called a power on stall. Let me start by telling exactly why we do this. And I've got to be able to show you how to put yourself in this predicament and then get yourself out of this predicament. You kind of think about the student sitting there going, so this is dangerous? Yes. I shouldn't do this in real life? No. And so why are you forcing me to actually do this and then forcing me to do the, to do the recovery? Good question. I don't know that, but we got to do it because the FAA wants to see it. Well, that's not correct. There's a meaning behind it. If you don't know the meaning, you're not going to do it. So I like to focus on the meaning behind everything and say, look, this is the reason why you have to do this. And if you don't understand it, your motivation is going to go way, way down. And I can't just train you to a check ride. I've got to train you for success and for safety and how to live and feel confident in your pilot technique, and not just out there saying, hey, what is the examiner going to ask me on the check ride? What is the examiner going to do with me on the check ride? You got to gouge on this person. No, I don't have a gouge, and you're not going to use a gouge. I'm going to train you how to be a safe pilot. Mm-hmm. That's the end of the story.
That's a great answer. I know a guy who equates what you just said to, I'm going to take this person up to a cliff and they're going to see how close they can get to the cliff. And then right as the rocks start tumbling off the edge and their feet starts to slip, I'm going to grab them and yank them back. And it's up until recently, I had never heard it equated that way. And it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, during multi-engine instruction, especially, I'll say, how absurd is it to actually do this VMC demo where we have to bring the airplane right up to this particular point where it's not safe to fly it up to that particular point. So and I've told the story several times where I'm like, so if you go up to this cliff, which is red line, and you look down and there's like glass shards and stalactites and dinosaurs and alcohol, like it's going to really hurt if you fall down in there. But I want you to stay right here at the edge. Watch your step. Don't go any further. Easy. If you go over, it's going to be bad. So then we step up. So that's red line. So we're going to back up about 10 feet where blue line is. And I'm going to tell my student, go, hey, you see that red line up there? Yeah. Don't ever go up there to that red line. Stay at blue line. If you go up there, you don't even want to know what's beyond that. It's bad. Trust me. You don't want to be up there. Stay at blue line, 10 feet back. You're good to go. And then you go into the reason why they should learn it. And then you tell them a story about why it's important. I was out flying with a multi-engine guy for a flight review, right? Guy's in a Baron. We do a single engine approach into Pine Mountain, Georgia. LaGrange, Georgia. We start to do the single engine missed approach. Okay. A lot of people don't feel comfortable in doing this. I'm like, all right, let's very safe altitude. We're at 200 feet. Let's go ahead and execute the mist. And the guy doesn't pull his gear up. He doesn't pull his flaps up. He adds power on the good engine. He starts to climb out. Airspeed's going lower and lower and lower. And as he starts to get down below blue line, really poor rudder control, I see that nose dancing to the left. And I said, watch it. I called for the controls. I suck the gear up, pull the flaps up, climbing out now at blue line. And he goes, my God, what was that just happened? And I said, that was you coming very close to a loss of control. And he goes, why did that happen? And I said, remember when you did your multi-engine training? Do you remember doing this stuff, a VMC demo and a VYSE drag demo? He says, I've never done either. And I don't remember doing that on my check ride. Of course, I face palm and I'm like, you and I've got to spend some time together. But here's the rub. If that was a true engine loss and he had to go around and I wouldn't have been in the airplane, he'd be dead. So, I have these go-to stories where I'm out there training and I see these things and I'm like, where did you learn this? Please let me help. Because if I wasn't here, you would not be here today, or you'd be in bad shape.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you said earlier. I mean, that person probably had extensive training on VMC. Obviously, they had to do it on their check ride, whether they remember it or not. But it goes back to that practical application of why were they doing it? They understood the maneuver in the time, but they didn't know what the real life reason for it was. And therefore, a single engine go around, they weren't going to know.
Right. And if they can't see it, pilots don't want to be students. They simply just want to fly because it's the best thing since sliced bread. And it's so cool. And you get up there and they're looking at all the broccoli and they're counting pools and they're like, oh man, this is so incredibly awesome. That's why we don't sell flight training, John. We don't sell flight training. We don't sell discovery flights. We're selling passion and love and feelings. That's what we sell to our clients, not this other stuff. If you told them they had to go out and do stalls on day one, they probably wouldn't sign up for flight training. But in order to capture that passion and say, look, I really want you to achieve what you want to. I want you to get up in that air, but we got to do all this stuff first. You have to center around that as an instructor.
So what aspect of flight instruction best prepared you for your current role, what you do now?
Well, it was owning my own flight school. That was probably the biggest highlight to kind of get me to where I am now. The reason being, and of course, there's books out there that explain what I'm about to tell you, but we start off as flight instructors and we're referred to as we could be referred to in business as the technician. So we're just out there, we're doing the technician work. And we're really not familiar what it takes to be a manager or what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And so one day we get this thing in our brain and we're like, hey, man, I'm out here every day and I'm flying this little 152 and I'm making money for the man. Why is the man getting all the money? I want some of this money. I want to do well. And so we think to ourselves, well, you're at Applebee's and you're writing on a cocktail napkin. You're like, if I buy this 152 for this amount and gas costs this, and man, I really think I could make some money as an independent flight instructor. And then you get out there in the field and then you realize, oh my God, what have I got myself into? About 2 months in there, after you're a little bit in debt, and you're like, I didn't think about insurance, and I didn't think about tie downs, and I didn't think about adding oil, and I didn't think about what the fuel would cost and the fluctuation of prices. And wow, there's not a lot of meat on the bone after you've cut out all what everybody else gets their hands into my income, little fingers into my income. So, looking at that particular aspect, when I had to jump directly from the technician to the entrepreneur, and I skipped over management, my business did not flourish for the first 2 years because I was so busy learning how aviation works. So if you don't understand how aviation works, you really can't get to where you need to be holistically, especially if you're trying to get in an administrative role like I am, which I still do fly each month. But, as far as an administrative role, you've got to understand the business side of things and how to manage things. So you can't skip around. If you're going to be a technician, fine, you learn the trade, but you just can't take a pilot and put them in a managerial role. They don't understand. And you really can't take a pilot and put them in an entrepreneurial role, because if you skip around like that, they don't have the ability to go back and manage, especially if you're a one-man operation or a one-woman operation. So having those management skills of owning my own school, that really gave me the appreciation of what it takes to get out there and say, we're going to have a standardized procedure for braking, because I'm sick and tired of paying $700 for a brake job. And you guys are going to do this standardized, and you try to be nice about it. And so it really gives you an upper hand, especially on the standardization side of the realm, which I embrace holistically every day, to get out there and say, wow, how can we do this better? How can we be more standardized? How can we get pilots on board with doing this? And if you don't know how to manage people, it's not going to work out well.
Sure. And as a addition to that question, the next question sort of adds to it. How did you take all of that and then utilize it to transition into your role at ATP?
Well, there was a lot of things now that went into this. And as a flight standards manager for ATP, we're looking at a nationwide level. We're looking at 70 different locations. We're looking at over 500 instructors. There's a lot of different spokes to this wheel. And it took a little bit from every aspect of it. So as a flight school owner, I understood the aspects of maintenance. I understood the aspects of overhead, even down to the smallest thing. I don't want to take too many notepads from the storeroom because somebody has to buy those. I want to make sure I tell the students how to take care of the plane because I don't want to have to buy parts prematurely than what we have planned, and so on and so on. I want to teach them how to lean properly. I want to teach them how to do all these things properly. And then there was experience I had with being a pilot examiner. That helped me work closer with the flight checks department at ATP. And then there was the things from the safety department and my military background, and just tons of things that's happened to me out into the field while working in the field, in which I got myself into. And I'm like, well, that's not good. I should have really thought about that. Wonder how I can better prepare myself in the future. So being well-rounded really helped to set me up for success working with ATP, because I've worked in a lot of different departments. And for me, that's the key to success. If you try to stay in one particular realm over a period of time, you're only going to be needed in that one realm. So what you have to do is go to the other departments and go, hey, how can I help? Or, hey, can you show me how to do that? Or, hey, how does that work? And so the more well-rounded you are, the more places that a company will be able to place you if they don't need you where you are. So yeah, being well-rounded.
Yeah, that's great advice. So final question, if you could give a new instructor a piece of advice for success in the profession, what would it be?
Be patient. It says the worst thing that you could deal with in this industry is, or probably one of the hardest things to overcome, is the concept of time. And, when I say this to people, I'm really trying to make sure that they understand what I'm saying. So the little story I like to project to them is this. And I go, do you remember the day you first soloed? And they're like, yeah. Remember the day you did your discovery flight? Yeah, I remember that day. How cool was that? Cool. I said, do you ever think you'd solo an airplane when you did your discovery flight? And they're like, no, man, it was so cool. It's like, so you got the day you soloed and you're like, man, it's going to be so cool when I'm a private pilot. And you remember that day you got your private pilot? Yeah, man, it was so cool. Hey, yeah, you made all this, you told all your family, and you're so cool, and you got your shirt and you check ride pictures, and that was so cool. I said, you got your instrument rating. Wasn't that cool? You never thought you'd be there because, you just like yesterday, you were just in discovery flight. So you never thought you'd be there. But here you are, and all those late nights of studying and looking over all the charts and the symbology and all the rules and procedures and regs. And God, how did I ever memorize that? But you did, and you passed it. And then you got into commercial and you went through that. And what a great time that was out there flying and building hours and learning all this stuff and new maneuvers, and maybe even flying a complex airplane or a TAA. And it's just so cool. And you thought, man, I never thought I'd be a commercial pilot, but here's that day. And here's that social media post. Hey, I'm now a commercially rated pilot. And then all your idiot family members that don't know about aviation, they're like, really, what airline do you fly for? Because they just don't know what they don't know. And so you make it all the way through and you get to the end of it, and you check CFI check ride, double I check ride, MEI check ride, and you get through the whole program. And you're like, whew, I'm here. But if I have to make you look back 9 months, a year, 2 years, and I'm like, remember when you did your discovery flight? Remember that? Remember how you thought this day would never happen? Well, here it is. Don't let the concept of time limit you for what you can do. Know your trade, make every day count, have a study regiment. You will get there, but wake up every day, set an agenda, do what's on the agenda, and then wake up tomorrow morning and do the same thing again. Just treat every day as a goal and just get through the day and you'll be fine. Everyone has this aura hanging over them when they're going through aviation about, will I be successful? Am I going to be scared about this? This is, how long will it take me? How long do I start earning money? How much do I pay back my student loans? I mean, there's so much worries, all this emotional baggage we have over our head, but it's every day. Treat every day as just trying to get through the day, have a set thing at the beginning of the day. I'm going to get through I'm going to read this many pages today. I'm going to do this practice test today. I'm going to do this sim today, this flight today, and just get through each day. Time is the worst enemy. Just learn how to deal with time.
Yeah, and I'll add one additional thought to that. And I don't remember who told me this, but they really stuck with me. And that was manage the moving goalpost. So, to your point of taking each day by day and making sure you celebrate the wins that you have, because once you make it to each goalpost, you're always, as pilots, we're always going, okay, I passed my private pilot check ride, onto my instrument pilot check ride, onto my commercial pilot check ride. Yeah. And it happens the next day for a lot of us. And we don't take the time to say, I just spent the last year or 6 months or whatever working on this thing and I completed it. And yay me, this is great. It's always, this is great, on to the next.
Yep.
And if we always live our life like that, which personally I have, and I wish I had gotten this advice earlier, but if we always live our life like that, we can never really truly understand all of the monumental things we've accomplished.
Right.
So Todd, any final thoughts? Anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I tell you what I'd like to do with you one day. You do such a hard job. You do such a great job with NAFI. I think I need to come back on here maybe in the next few months, and I want to interview John Niehaus and do 10 questions with you, because I think people need to know more about you and the job you do and the background that you've done. Because man, you just really go out there and you get the job done, and you put NAFI on a platform where it should be, because there's not a lot of professional development stuff out there for pilots or for flight instructors, even a more narrow margin. So I appreciate all that you do. I think we've covered enough for today, and everybody's heard about Todd enough. So I appreciate everything you do and what NAFI does.
Well, thank you so much. And it's our goal to be able to do things like this, to highlight our members and highlight the instructors out there that are really kind of making us all shine. So thanks for taking the time. And one last question, and that's if somebody wanted more information about ATP and wanted to possibly either work or become a student at ATP, what would they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as with everything else in our world nowadays, there's a website for you, www.atpflightschool.com. And you can just scroll down to whatever section you want to look at. They're all different type of programs and how, where do you want to go and what do you want to do? And if you want a career with us, you just scroll down at the very bottom and there's a thing that says careers. You can click on that and maybe ATP is going to be the right fit for you.
And I hope you, if you are interested, I hope you do that. And just know that ATP as an organization has been a longtime friend of NAFI, and we appreciate all the support that ATP provides us and our members.
And we appreciate you as well, John.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.